So in this video, I want to talk a little bit about the military history of the ancient world, mainly the Greek, Mycenaean Greek, and to some extent the Roman civilizations. So we'll talk a little bit about those. So where to start? Well, the most logical place, it seems to me, is to start with the Trojan War. Trojan War is the first war that can be considered to be first war fought by Greeks, or the prototypical Greeks, which can be said to be somewhat historical or to have historical context. So, of course, there are earlier conflicts in Babylon and Mesopotamia and Egypt and in China as well. And we could talk about those ad nauseum, but let's talk about the Trojan War as a starting place. It is, of course, the war that's recorded by Homer in the Iliad and the Odyssey, and tells the tale of what could be interpreted historically to be the Mycenaean conflict with the former colony or Greek colony of Troy, or Ilium, as it's known in Latin. So, Troy is on the coast of Anatolia, near the Dardanelles Strait, and one of the members of the royal family of Troy is Paris. Now, Paris has been tasked as a part of the famous judgment of Paris, with deciding who amongst the goddesses Athena, Aphrodite, and Hera is the most beautiful, and he has been promised by Aphrodite that if he picks her, he'll be given Helen, who is considered to be the most beautiful woman in the world. Of course, unfortunately, she is married to the king of Sparta, Menelaus, and Menelaus is quite intimate with the king of kings, who is Agamemnon of Mycenae. Now, the historical setting for this is considered to be between about 1100 and 1000 BC. So archaeological excavations in Turkey have located a site which is believed to be in fact the ancient city of Troy, and it was found that this site was devastated on several occasions, but a particular devastation by fire appeared to have occurred about this timeline, about the turn of the millennium 3,000 years ago. So this seems to coincide with a great conflict, which could be described as that which was fought in the Trojan conflict. And we are mainly familiar in the Western ethos. We are mainly familiar with the Trojan War from the work of Homer, and we know that this is a war for all of Greece against, it's a national war in that sense, against the Asiatic barbarian, you could say, which has wrongly usurped the proud queen of Sparta. Now, this is an interesting trope, the beginning of these great histories with tales that seem so domestic, like a marriage dispute or a silly contest between some goddesses who are playing with the fates of man, as they do. But there is some historical context for this. So even if the characters involved take on mythical and semi-mythical qualities, such as the wily, crafty Odysseus, or the demigod Achilles, the son of a water nymph, I believe it's Thetis, and the other larger-than-life persona and mythical interventions that occur in the Iliad and the Odyssey over the 10 years of the Trojan siege of the Trojan War. And this becomes the foundation for the entire Greek Western tradition. So Hesiod in the Theogony then expands on the Homeric canon to create and develop the religion, and introduces things like Athena sprouting from Zeus's forehead, or Aphrodite arising from the foam of severed testicles and things like this. So the Trojan War acts as a watershed moment in the history of Mycenae and the Mycenaean civilization, and we can see this as what then becomes a formula that will play itself out in these future conflicts, east versus west being the key here, key dynamic. So the Trojan War, of course, ends with the sacking of Troy. We know from Virgil that Aeneas escapes to go found Rome, and then his relative Brutus goes on to found Britain. We are led to believe by Geoffrey Monmouth. And Troy is sacked and burned, basically burned to the ground, and the Trojan riches are plundered and carried back to Greece, sometimes very haphazardly, or not at all, as in the case of Odysseus returning to Ithaca. Now this is about the peak of the Agamemnon's kingship, is really about the peak of the Mycenaean civilization, we could say, because the Mycenaean civilization eventually goes into a decline and then is destroyed by Dorian invaders from the north, who go down into Greece and into the Peloponnesian and found the city-states there. So there's a dark age, similar to the dark age between the collapse of the Minoan civilization in Crete and the rise of the Mycenaean civilization in Greece. And so this dark age lasts about 700 BC to 600 BC. It's said to sort of ease, and then we see the reemergence of the city-states on the Greek peninsula. And those city-states, or the Greek archipelago, I should say, those city-states, the most powerful of them are Sparta and Athens, and there soon arises a second struggle between Asia and the West, and this is chronicled by Herodotus, the so-called, who's credited by many as being the first historian. And Herodotus, his task is to systematically catalog the events of what become known as the First Persian War. So this, the Achaemenid Empire has taken over all of Egypt and Babylon and Turkey, and as a huge, and Iran, of course, has a huge empire in the capital at Persepolis in Mesopotamia, and are now prepared to have been dealing with revolts in the Ionian Islands, which are Greek colonies, but are not entirely loyal to the satraps that they're part of, that they are slotted into in the Persian Empire. And so the Persians have, Darius the First has sent a invasion force to go knock the Greeks, teach them a lesson or two. And so that invasion force lands at Marathon, in the plains of Marathon, and is confronted by a Athenian army of hoplites, who then famously charge across the field. This is about 490 BC, and defeat the overwhelmingly numerical Persians, who then retreat. Now this is seen as a watershed moment in history, where what should have happened is the Persians should have conquered Greece is instead reversed, and this leads to a long series of reversals, which will actually ultimately lead to the decline of the entire Achaemenid Empire. So what happens is the second phase of the Persian invasion, which is when Emperor Xerxes attempts now to bump off the Greeks, doing what Darius could not do. And so he assembles an enormous force, said to be hundreds of thousands of men, many ships of Phoenician and Egyptian ships at his disposal, and builds a bridge across the Hellespont and travels from Asia to Greece, sweeps down and defeats the Spartans at the Hot Gates at the Battle of Thermopylae, and then actually seize Athens itself, raze the Acropolis, and the Athenians are forced to retreat to the island of Salamis, just off the coast of Athens, where in a brilliant naval battle commanded by Admiral Themistocles, the Athenians are able to reverse, with their allies, are able to reverse their fortunes so far and destroy pretty much all of Xerxes' fleet, which turns the tide of the battle of the war, since he can no longer guarantee his naval supplies, which is necessary for his huge army. And so he leaves a small force in Asia Minor, and then retreats, and in occupying northern Greece, and then retreats to Anatolia. And this force that he's left is then eventually defeated at the Battle of Plataea by another Greek coalition. So that victory basically ends the Xerxes phase of the war, and now leads to the war chronicled by Thucydides, known as the Peloponnesian War, which is really a civil war among the Greek states that have survived this far. And so, if Herodotus is known as the first historian, Thucydides is often known as sort of the first historical scientist or political scientist, in that he's looking at events that occurred during his lifetime and that he can chronicle, and that he supposedly does with such detail that he gives you the exact speeches that these people are saying. Pericles' funeral oration being one of those great speeches. And so, what has happened? In the Achaean northern half of Greece, the Athenians have become the dominant city-state, and their trade networks have spread across the Aegean, and they've established a financial council and bank treasury on the island of Delos. So the Athenian hegemony now becomes known as the Delian League, and they have all of their allies tied together. Their only real competitors in the north are the Thebans, and the Thebans aren't fighting with them. So the Thebans themselves are on a long decline. In the south, in the Peloponnesus, the Spartans are still the dominant power. They're being challenged by Argos, the city of Argos, but they're not in open conflict with each other. And so the Spartans are the most powerful state there. Their league is called the Peloponnesian League, and this is another alliance that they've assembled to challenge, to block the Athenian expansion. And so this leads to a conflict between the two as they struggle for hegemony. And to make a long story short, they basically battle each other to exhaustion. The Athenians inflicting several notable defeats on the Spartans. Spartans being unable to really damage Athens in response, until finally what happens, after both sides have been weakened severely, and in fact are being now challenged by the resurgent cities like Corinth and Argos and Thebes, and Megara, the Athenians now plan to send one of their generals to their colony at Syracuse in Sicily. This is a great Sicilian expedition, part of another small war that they've started, not with Sparta, but with some of their allies. And the Athenian general sent to lead this expedition is Alcibiades. Alcibiades famously betrays the Athenians and to the Spartans, and then later betrays the Spartans to the Persians, following the legacy of Themistocles, who himself betrayed Greece to the Persians later when it was profitable for him after he was not being properly rewarded by the Hellenics. So, at any rate, Alcibiades betrays the Spartans, well, first the Athenians and the Spartans, and ultimately Sparta is able to topple Athens, and they impose a peace in which they force the Athenians to abolish their walls, which was the main Athenian safeguard against Spartan conquest. They simply could not surpass the Athenian engineering on their large fortress walls, and so the Athenians are forced to remove them by the Spartans when they are victorious in the very long and brutal Peloponnesian War, Civil War. Now, during this time, there's been a great renaissance and in Athens, and the democracy has flourished, and Socrates has lectured and denounced the sophists and been murdered by the state, and Plato has left Athens, And one of their colleagues is Xenophon, and Xenophon is a Greek mercenary hoplite who happens to be, he's famous for his book The Anubis, which is the 10,000, which is about his adventures trying to, as a Greek mercenary, trying to get out of Persia and return to Greece, and they're able to do so. And what this demonstrates is that a small group, a corps of Greek hoplite infantry can negotiate through the entire Persian Empire without much trouble. It's quite a startling revelation when this is revealed and Xenophon returns to Greece. Now, in the meantime, the philosopher Aristotle is rising to prominence, and the Spartan hegemony is about to face a challenge from Thebes. Thebes is resurgent in the north, and their commander, their great leader, is known as Epaminondas. And Epaminondas believes he can break the Spartan hegemony by defeating their phalanx, and he thinks he can do this because his plan is to build a single phalanx of like 50 ranks deep, which would just be a solid block of infantry, much like Xenophon describes in the 10,000. And this huge block of infantry, supported by an elite guard and some cavalry, will be solid and mobile enough to defeat the Spartans, which they do at the famous Battle of Electria, and kill the Spartan king amongst other casualties, and effectively topple the Spartan hegemony. So Thebes becomes a dominant power in Greece. However, one of the soldiers who had fought as a hostage at Electria under Epaminondas is the Macedonian Philip. And Philip is biding his time, assembling his power in Macedon, and very soon he challenges Thebes and topples them and begins to unite Greece. Now, he's bitterly opposed by Demosthenes, who in his lectures, the Philippics, basically pillories Philip, hoping to describe him as a tyrant and therefore justify his assassination, which Philip is eventually assassinated before he can unite Greece. However, his son and successor, Alexander, then goes on to successfully unite Greece under the Macedonians, and then proceeds to invade and conquer the entire Persian Empire in the culmination of this great historical reversal that Hegel later will go on to describe, where the West has done the impossible and toppled the East. So in a great cycle of some kind, the Alexander's conquest of Persia this is Darius III he's able to defeat at the Battle of Gaugamela. But this is first he has to conquer Egypt. So because the Hoplite army that Spartan king, the Macedonian king wants to use to conquer Persia doesn't have much of a fleet, and the Persian Empire, the Achaemenid Empire, has a better fleet in the form of their Phoenician and Egyptian allies. Alexander knows he has to flank them and capture their naval bases. So this he does by moving across the Hellespont and then through Asia Minor and then conquering Lebanon and Palestine, and then taking over the Sinai Peninsula and Egypt, where he's crowned pharaoh, which gives him a claim to usurp the throne of the Achaemenid Empire, which at the Battle of Gaugamela he is able to defeat Darius, who then eventually flees and leaves Persepolis open, which is then plundered by the Macedonians, and Darius III is killed by he's betrayed by his own house guards later, and so Alexander becomes the Persian emperor, and which now means that the only thing standing before him is India, which he proceeds to invade along with Afghanistan, and rather successfully. Finally returns to Persepolis in 323 BC, where he dies either of poison or of pneumonia, depending on the story you believe. Possibly he is assassinated, where his successors, what are known as the Diadochi, I believe it is, the successor generals of Alexander split the empire into fragments, of which one of them is Ptolemy in Egypt, another is becomes known as the Seleucid Empire, which is the Persia, India, and Macedonia. And so they all start fighting with each other. However, during this time, there's now arisen in the west another challenger, which is, of course, the Roman state. Now, the Romans, after a long series of wars, have managed to unite the Italian peninsula and are now bumping into Gaul in the north, and in the south, the Sicilian colony Syracuse, and also the Phoenician colony Carthage, which controls most of Libya and northern Tunisia and northern Africa, and is a very powerful trading order with a large mercenary army. Now, the Roman Republic it fights a series of long and brutal wars with the Carthaginians, which are known as the Punic Wars, and there's 3 of them. And the second one, which is the most famous, it involves the Carthaginian general Hannibal, who easily bests the Romans on pretty much every occasion until he's finally and is careening through the Italian peninsula with his army, having taken his elephants over the Alps, much as as Napoleon will be inspired to do many years later. So the Carthaginians are, however, defeated by Scipio Africanus, great Roman statesman and general, and the Republic is saved from the Carthaginian hordes, the barbarians, and Carthage is eventually itself is eventually captured in the Third Punic War and is then totally destroyed and salted so that nothing will grow in the oasis of Carthage again, and their power is then finished. The Romans by this point have become such an enormous state. Their republic is having difficulty controlling its army, which becomes fragmented, and the different army groups, which are led by magistrates known as praetors, praetor, of course, being the origin of Praetorian Guard. The various praetors, who are magistrates, are slowly assembling their loyal armies, and then they begin to feud with each other. And so there's a series of civil wars, one of which is known as the Social War, in which the dictator Sulla comes to power. And then Sulla is followed by a series of oligarchs, although the power of the Senate is coming and waxing and waning. And this period is known for its very famous characters such as Senator Cato and Cicero, who leave quite interesting records about this period of turmoil in the Roman Republic. And eventually what happens is the 3 most powerful generals in the state form a triumvirate, which becomes known as the First Triumvirate, which is Julius Caesar, who conquered Gaul, Pompey, who is known for conquests in Egypt, and Pompey the Great, other legendary campaigns, and the Senator Crassus, who was one of the wealthiest men in the Roman Empire. So this triumvirate tries to consolidate power. They eventually feud with each other, vying for supremacy, of which Caesar eventually achieves after Pompey is defeated and killed actually in Egypt by one of Cleopatra's relatives, the pharaoh. So Caesar assumes total authority. He is then assassinated by Brutus to prevent him becoming a tyrant, and Caesar's adopted nephew Octavian vowing revenge, forms the Second Triumvirate with Caesar's greatest cavalry commander, who is Antony, and another man named Lepidus. So Octavian, Lepidus, and Antony then feud amongst each other in the second round of civil conflict, civil strife. And of course what eventually happens is Antony is killed in Egypt with Cleopatra, and Octavian rules supreme and forms the Principate, which is the Roman Empire. So that gets you through the entire tradition right up to the birth of Christ, more or less. And so the series, you can see that the whole thing is shaped by a series of staggered conflicts, of which the turning point is when the Macedonian Empire conquers the Persian Achaemenid Empire, and is then in turn fragmented and swallowed by the Roman republic, which then becomes so vast